Hey y'all, welcome back to Right at the Wire. Well, today we're going to be looking at the Kentucky Oaks Late Pick 5. It's 5 stakes races anchored by the Oaks, and it's pretty intriguing, so let's take a look at the fields. The first race in the Oaks Pick 5 is the 7th at Churchill Downs, and it's the Grade 2 8 Bells. It's run at 7 furlongs for 3-year-old fillies. And first thing we want to note is that it'll be run out of a chute. So the horses on the inside, the 1, the 2, and maybe even the 3 hole, got to rush up there. Otherwise, they run the risk of getting pinned back. It's not as long a chute as for the mile, of course, but it's still something you have to think about. Number 1 is Condensation. Chris Hartman is more of a claiming trainer. Graded stakes aren't necessarily what he does. This one will appreciate the cutback from the route to sprint. Didn't do bad on a closer favoring track in the fantasy stakes, but obviously succumbed to wet paint as everybody did. I think that this one will like the cutback and route to sprint is a pretty good angle for Chris Hartman. Just graded stakes aren't necessarily what he does well. I think this one might be up against it class-wise, and I probably wouldn't use. Sabre Tough hasn't run since the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. I always want to be wary of horses coming back off of that any of those Breeders' Cup races, particularly when it's been this long. This one showed steady incremental improvement over the course of her 2-year-old year. But Dallas Stewart is 0 for 33 with long layoffs in this type of scenario, and that's enough for me, and particularly when you consider the other talent in this race, I think this one's really up against it. Olivia Twist is interesting, trained by Todd Fincher, nice trainer from the Southwest. She's route to sprint will be a very good, I think, a welcome task for this one. Obviously had problems with wet paint at Oaklawn, but you do see improvement, and more importantly, you see the beaten lengths got smaller with every race. So this one is on the upswing. The only concern I might have is that was a career high buyer last time, and it was significantly higher than any effort she had had before. So I do wonder about a bounce a little bit. But I think this one at 12-1 is an interesting alternative and one to be thinking about if you want to try to beat the favorite here. Effortlessly Elegant was the pace in the Ashland, and she's the sole reason Punch Bowl is not in the Kentucky Oaks. She took the lead and was able to control things from there. Eventually succumbed and just proved that I probably class-wise she's not really a fit, particularly in this race with other early speed. So I wouldn't use. Grand Love is interesting. Steve Asmussen's been very high on this one. I think the cutback to sprint is absolutely necessary for this one. You can see she broke her maiden, got her career high running at 6.5 furlongs, and then the 2 turns just haven't worked out. She runs on the front end and just never seems to have enough late. So I think this is what the doctor ordered for sure. And at 15-1, I think you're getting a really nice price. If you want to try to buck the favorite, you could do a lot worse. This one should have the stamina to hang in there in any type of a pace battle. Red Carpet Ready, kind of disappointed in the Devona Dale, but that's sort of been the thing with 3-year-old fillies this year. You just can't count on any of them for the most part. This one has been, prior to that race, was showing steady improvement. I just think maybe the forward gal took a little bit out of her, and she just didn't have anything to fight. The pace was pretty hot for a mile race in the last one. Problem is here, she's got a lot of other early speed to deal with, and I think that while I think this one is competitive, I don't think she's going to. I think she's going to have a lot of trouble in this race. At 3-1, I think that's an underlay, and if there's others I like better. Positano Sunset just isn't good enough. I think that's the bottom line. Has proven so in the 2 stakes efforts. Ian Wilkes, the barn is going well for him right now. He had a really nice Keeneland meet, but I think this one is outclassed and really doesn't have I don't think would have to have a major league meltdown to have any type of factor, and I don't think that's going to happen. Exceed is very interesting. Chad Brown and Flavian Pratt with Juddmonte owning, fantastic connections. Interesting stat, Chad Brown sending horses into a graded stakes in their second start, 3-year-olds, he's 0 for 2. But he's 100% in the money. So you can bank this one will probably be in the exotics for sure. I don't know about actually winning the race, though. But Chad Brown is 29% with the second start with 3-year-olds. This one's maiden race was pretty impressive. She re-rallied, looked beat and re-rallied on the rail and was able to draw off, and it looked really impressive to the point where you definitely were thinking, I can't wait to see this one run again. However, she's kind of up against it in this one, but I think this one has a lot of promise, and I don't think it's likely that she's going to win today. But I think that this is one you can use in your exotics comfortably, and her off-the-pace running style should be a plus in this race. The reason all of them are playing for second is number 9, Money's Gold. Todd Pletcher, Rod Ortiz, Robert Lowe, great connections. This one is I have really been looking forward to watching. If you consider she had a one-on-one buyer, won by 14.5 lengths in her debut. They went to the bench. Her first start out after a long layoff, and she runs an 88, okay? And that clearly an off effort for her, and still won by 6 1/4. That 88 is good enough to beat anybody in this field right now. So she doesn't have to run, and you can see her next start in the state breds. She won by 17 and lengths and change and won for fun with a 106 buyer. She doesn't have to run her best race to beat this field. Now, this is a class test, that's true, and it's a fairly significant one. But really, if you look at this field, this isn't like a world-beating Grade 2 stakes field where there's a whole lot of great options. I think that's why Exceed is in this race. So I think this is a good foray into graded stakes for her. She's coming third off the layoff. I think all systems are go, and I would highly consider singling Money's Gold in this spot. Second leg of the Oaks Pick 5 is the 8th race at Churchill, and it's the ungraded, unbridled Sydney Stakes for $300,000. It's for fillies and mares 3 years old and up, and it's run on the turf at 5.5 furlongs. Number 1 is Baystorm. Baystorm is her wheelhouse in the ungraded stakes company. That's predominantly where she runs, and hasn't done bad at the graded stakes level either. The Wishing Well last time was an okay effort, but she went to the bench immediately afterwards and hasn't been seen for over 2 months. Normally, Jonathan Thomas is 30% in turf sprints, but his barn was cold as ice at Keeneland, and he's 0 for 5 in this particular spot coming off a long layoff. I think it's logical to think about this one for the exotics, but the barn isn't going very well right now, and I think since Caravel is in this race, I think a win is highly unlikely, but a use underneath is possible. Salvaille is coming off second off the layoff, and very positively got a career-high buyer after nearly a year off, and that should be considered a really good sign. Got a regular rider, Brian Hernandez Jr., great Kentucky circuit rider, and this is a nice scenario for Cherie DeVoe, second off the layoff, and she's 35% with turf sprints. So at 20 to 1, if Caravel doesn't fire, this one looks poised and ready to run a big one. You might consider. Majestic de Oro, another hot barn. Brendan Walsh was smoking at Keeneland, and so he's on all cylinders right now. You got Rod Ortiz in the irons here. Problem is, Brendan Walsh is 0 for 15 in this particular spot. Now, when you have a hot barn, sometimes you can overcome the lack of a good angle. But this one, is coming off a rather long layoff, and the Music City wasn't much to write home about. The prior efforts really wouldn't get it done in this spot. So I think maybe this horse needs a race, and I don't like in this particular scenario. Sarah Harper, every time I watched this horse for the last 4 or 5 races, I kept saying to myself, this one needs a break, and finally got it. So this one's coming off a layoff. That's the good news. The bad news is it's on turf, and her lone turf effort at Saratoga last August was nothing to write home about at all, and she didn't factor whatsoever. Her dirt efforts, she always seems to give an honest effort and falls short. I don't see where there's any potential for a big swing here that would put her in this race, and I wouldn't use. Miner's Queen did pretty well in the last race. I mean, you had to run against Twilight Gleaming, and they set a course record, and unattractive favored closers. So she didn't do bad being on the front end and still hung on pretty well. The effort prior to that wasn't very good, but maybe she just needed a race after the layoff. So I think this one's on the upturn. She's up against it in this one, but maybe you think about this one for the exotics at 20-1, and you know, an exacta with Caravel is a better choice. Don't think she's a win candidate though, even with Luis Saez aboard. New Boss is the one horse in this race coming from route to sprint, and I always love that angle. You know, you don't see it on turf too often, but if you look at this one's turf efforts, she would be competitive in this race. But if you go further back, you'll note the last time they did route to sprint with this one was she ran in May in the Tepin Stakes and finished a pretty good third. And then they wheeled her back to, they turned her back to a turf sprint in July, and she won the P-Patch and did it pretty handily. So maybe that's what the doctor ordered here. Maybe it's a good angle. It wakes her up a little bit. Her prior efforts at the ungraded stakes level are pretty good and competitive. So maybe this gives her another little jump at 15-1. I think it's more likely to think about this one for under in the exotics, but that is a good price. And if you want to be bold and try and beat Caravel, this one might give you the shot to do it. Monty's Kitchen just isn't good enough. Michelle Lovell's a good trainer, but I don't see anything here to tell me that this one's going to factor in this race. Easy toss. Uv, disappointed in the last one. Granted, it was a pretty big class hike whenever you got Twilight Gleaming to deal with, and ran the same fate as Miner's Queen. However, the big thing with this one was she just didn't settle. She was fractious in the gate, and from what I understand, Jarrett Loveberry said when this one's comfortable and relaxed, she runs a race. When she's not, she doesn't. So obviously that was a case of she just was too keyed up prior to the race, and that was a pretty big stakes day. Going to get the same thing here on the Oaks with an even bigger crowd. So you got to wonder if that's perhaps going to compromise a good effort. Still, 5-1 is too light a price, particularly when you have Caravel in this race. So I would consider maybe for under, but I don't think is a logical win candidate, even if she goes back and runs a decent race. Little Joel did pretty well in the Giants Causeway. I had to check really hard on the backstretch, and it was really noticeable. You could see the head popping up in the air on Javier Castellano. So she still did pretty well to keep on. This one, I think, is poised for another good effort. I'm not sure it's going to be good enough against Caravel. 8-1 is not quite the price we'd like. I'd like it to be a little better. But this is a little softer field, and so perhaps the chances of Little Jewel factoring are a lot better, and you might consider underneath if you want to be bold and you think Caravel's due for a bounce or something like that. This might be a pretty good choice to try and take her down. Love of My Heart, I don't see anything here to get excited about, and is coming off a really long layoff, and that's enough for me. I pass. Caravel is a deserving favorite. You see her last two starts were against the boys, won the turf sprint and the Shakertown, and that was a pretty darn good field in the Shakertown. Bad Beat Brian gave her all she could handle and still was able to overcome. Now, if you think at 6 years old that takes a lot out of her, maybe you're getting her in a soft spot here. But it seems highly unlikely. She does not have to run her best race to win this. That's really the bottom line to it. And you got Brad Cox and Tyler Gaffleone. I mean, usually Cox, when they're going well, they stay that way for a while. So I would say that all systems are go for Caravel, and I think is a likely single in the pick 5. Guaria Comet, trained by Paulo Lobo. I will say this, the Keeneland form, or the Turfway form rather, did really well at Keeneland. Horses moving from the synthetic onto the turf or the dirt did pretty well. Now, this one's in pretty decent form and seems to be on the upswing. So maybe you think about that, moving to turf, where, this one is definitely improving at 4 years old. At 20-1, perhaps you get a nice overlay, and maybe you want to think about this one underneath in the exotics. However, I wouldn't consider this one a win candidate. Third leg of the Oaks Pick 5 is the 9th race at Churchill, and it's the Grade 1 La Troyenne Stakes, and this is a really solid field. This is a true Grade 1. Run at 1 mile and a 16th on the dirt for 4-year-olds and up, fillies and mares. Number 1 is Played Hard. Phil Bauer was sneaky good at Keeneland in the last meet. And when a barn is like that, then you always want to pay attention, particularly when it's Rigney Racing, which has had a really good year as far as a barn goes. So, but he's got those things working for them pre-race. This one runs on the front end and is always, for the most part, competitive. This is I would consider this to be a class hike, to be sure. Has run at the Grade 1 level before, but I think most of the time is at the Grade 3. So this is a bit of a class hike. Is coming off of freshening, should be firing. Likes to run on the front end, and being on the rail should be a good place. Ought to be able to get into position. It's more of the way the barn is going that gets me excited about this one. 9-2, I think, is a square price. There is other speed in this race, but I think you want to consider this one because I think this one's going to run a nice race. Search Results is a player in here for sure. The only thing I'm going to say is if you look at this one's running lines, this one does not run well off the bench, and she's coming off a fairly big layoff post Breeders' Cup. And as we've seen, these horses coming off these long layoffs after the Breeders' Cup don't tend to fire terribly well for the most part. And Chad Brown is really good with long layoffs. There's no question about it. Wouldn't deny that for a minute. But if a horse doesn't like to run off the bench, there's not much he can do about it. And if you look here, anytime Search Results has had a layoff, she has not fired terribly well. So you have to consider that. When you're looking at this horse. Now, the other thing is she's always been in really good fields. That's true too, and this is no exception. So there's just that little thing in the back of my mind that this one's not going to run a really big race, and may still factor. But at 4-1, I think I can do a little better with others. So I'm considering not using. 63 Caliber likes to run on the front end, and you've got other speed that's much more talented than this one. And that last effort in the Houston Ladies, granted it was in the mud, but wasn't very solid. Even with the freshening, she would have to run back to or surpass her best effort ever, which was the Cumley Stakes at a 94 buyer, and I don't think that's going to be good enough in this instance, so I'm not using. Secret Oath just lost a heartbreaker to Clairiere in the Apple Blossom. That was a great race. If you had a chance to see it, I hope you did. Got a career high buyer. It was a speed favoring track. I'm a little surprised she actually lost it. That tells you how great a race Clairiere ran coming from behind. But she's firing on all cylinders with Tyler Gaffleone. They're doing great things together. It's third off the layoff. D. Wayne is 25%. In third off the layoff in Roots. So you have to believe this one's going to fire a good effort. On all cylinders, all systems go. I think it's an absolute use. Soul of an Angel, on the other hand, isn't nearly good enough to factor in this race. And enough said. I don't think this one can factor, so no use. Classic Edition is really getting a big test this time. This is sort of a make or break at the Grade 1 level. Has done pretty well as at 3-year-olds only, and won the Royal Delta last time at 4. So facing older for the first time. So there's definitely some positives here. This one should rate right off the leaders. Got a Rad Ortiz aboard. I'm just not certain that this one's got what it takes to win this race. You're going to get a good price at 8-1 if you like her as an alternative to some of the chalk here. I could see using her for sure, but I think underneath is more likely. Society is stretching out again to 2 turns, and this one was going great guns prior to the distaff. And then crash. And just, it was a really tough field. I mean, Mouthot, Blue Stripe, Clairiere. It was a great field. And so it was a closer favoring track. So she had some things working against her, and, just didn't happen. The problem is when she came off the Breeders' Cup layoff, she didn't run a very good race either. Granted, she was running against Goodnight Olive, and nobody's beating that horse in sprints, period. So we can give her a pass for that, and it was coming off a long layoff. So second off, I expect a better effort here. The problem is you do have other speed in this race, and they're posted on the inside. So she's going to have a bit of a challenge to get to the spot where she wants to, and will not have an easy lead. So there are some things to like with this one. She's got great early speed and could very well wire this field if she catches them a little off. But to me, I'm just not sure that that she's going to be able to do it here. I have mixed feelings. I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to use. I'm not so sure I will. Desert Dawn is really just sort of a cut below. I think really hasn't won the Santa Anita Oaks, and then it did got third in the Kentucky Oaks, but really hasn't built on it, let's say, and has had some decent efforts out west. And the Beholder Mile, though, she really just was kind of. I mean, she was willing in the stretch, but she blew the turn and swung out 6 wide, and really didn't seem to have that extra punch you'd like to see to win a race, particularly a graded stakes race. That was a nice field, and you're going to see Amore here as well. Just seems to be a cut below. Second off the layoff isn't a bad angle for Phil D'Amato, and he's a good trainer, so maybe you can think about this one. Phil D'Amato was doing pretty well at Keeneland. Any horse he was bringing from out west did okay. There's maybe some things to think about. If you like a horse to upset the apple cart at 20-1, maybe you think about. But I just think this one's a cut below, and more than likely is underneath. Pauline's Pearl is in a really good spot for Steve Asmussen. Third off the layoff, and this one didn't really run very much in the Beholder at all, but it's more the spot. He's 38% third off in Grade 1 routes with a 250 ROI. Now, if you consider that she started the year with the Houston Ladies Classic, granted it was in the mud, got the win, and then just sort of languished in the Beholder, maybe she's ready for something better. Now, I say all this knowing full well this is a really tough field, but she does come from off the pace, and if there is a bit of a meltdown, this one's going to go under the radar, and you might want to think about this one with the steal. At 8-1, I think it's going to drift up from there, given the other horses in this race. So I think you're going to get a decent price. And maybe this is one you think about to upset the apple cart. Amore ran a really nice race in the Beholder. And, Brad Cox, when he has them going well, they stay that way. The only thing I'll say is that this is going to require another jump for this one. She just ran off her career high of a 95. I'll expect she'll need a better effort in this field. She was all out to get up to win that race last time, to catch Fun to Dream, and it was a really nice effort. I would fully expect this one to run another good one, but we'll need a better effort than that to factor here. This is a better field for sure. She's been at Churchill for a while. The tab looks pretty good. No reason to bet against it at 5-1. If you get anything near there, I think this is a bona fide win candidate, particularly when she's got pace to run to. So I think this one's a logical use. The fourth leg of the Oaks Pick 5 is the 10th race at Churchill Downs, and it's the Grade 2 Edgewood Stakes. It's run on the turf at 1 1/16, and it's for 3-year-old fillies. This is an extremely contentious race. Number 1 is Girl Named Charlie, trained by Tom Amos, and the Lacombe Memorial didn't come out to be a very good race, as the second place finisher, Beautiful Navigator, was up the track in the Appalachian, and a lot of the contenders from that race are back in here. Just came off her career high and is third off the layoff, so I suppose there's a possibility of some improvement, but there's others that are much more appealing here, so I wouldn't use this one. Liguria is one of the 3 Chad Browns in here, as often is the case with turf races in America. This one last was seen in the Jimmy Durante to close out the 2-year-old campaign, and won pretty impressively, I thought. This one looked like she had a lot more in the tank to win that race. So it's logical to expect a good race here. I think debuting at 3, Chad Brown's very good with long layoffs, and you get Flavian Pratt aboard. The only question is that there isn't a lot of early pace in this race, and the buyers were a little light at 2. So we maybe want to wait one with this one. But I think improvement's logical. And if you do get a price, you might want to think about. Cairo Consort, we've seen a few times this year. And I kind of get the feeling that this one's really not improving. I think it seems to be kind of stuck at the same level. That's just kind of my feeling. Now, the fact that there is an early pace in this race, I think upgrades her chances because, as we know, she can run basically any way she wants. But I think being up and near the pace is really important in this race, and I'll expect that's where she's going to be. If that's the case, I think that gives her a really good chance to factor here. So it's a deep field, but I think this is one that you can use comfortably. Sabalenka will likely, I would think they will try to send her up, but she just doesn't cut it. She's a cut below these, probably 2 cuts if you ask me. Second off the layoff isn't a bad place to be, but the last race wasn't very good, and it was her career high going into her 3-year-old year, so maybe there's a little bit of improvement, but I think she'd have to make a monster step to factor here, and I don't see it likely. Preliminary is pretty interesting. Won the debut in pretty good fashion and closed with a big long stride and really looks the part of a turf horse. The only thing is not going to have a lot of pace to run to here. If you note on her maiden, she had pace to run to last time. So the added ground is definitely a help. But one thing I did notice is that running in the stretch, she was looking in the stands. So there was a bit of greenness there, a bit of distractions. And in this race, that probably will cost her because this is a pretty deep field. So 5-1 seems a little short for the second start into a graded stakes, and but you know, it's possible for this one to factor. Mission of Joy won the Florida Oaks at Tampa last time. All her turf starts have been there. You see steady improvement. The only thing I'll say is that Alpha Bella, who ran second in that last race, came back in the Appalachian and was up the track. Was nowhere to be found. Now, I think she's a little better than that, so maybe we don't have to downgrade this quite so much. But I think there's other closers in this race that will probably make it difficult for this one to factor. 5-1, I don't really like the price very much, and Graham Motion is 2 for 19, switching off Lasix into a stakes race. So I don't think that's a good angle for this one here. Comanche Country, I've always liked this horse. Coming from California, Phil D'Amato did pretty well bringing his West Coast string to Keeneland, and most of them factored pretty well. So I have a feeling the second start for this one, to start for the 3-year-old year, it might be a pretty good effort. Now, if you consider she matched her career high buyer in her first start this year and was running at a mile, where I think, you know, more ground is what this one wants. She ran into a runaway winner last time and just was up against it tactically. I think this one's sitting on a better race, and I've always liked the fight in this horse, particularly the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. She had a lot of traffic issues down the stretch, and she was parked in the 1 hole and didn't have a lot of traffic. So I think this one has some upside, and at 10-1 might be a pretty good thought, but I'll guess under is probably more likely given the lack of early speed. But the added ground and the second start, I think, is a good place for this one, so you might want to think about it. Heavenly Sunday, Cairo Concert's got this one's number. She just can't beat her, and there's other talent in here. I think this one's probably going to try to go to the front end, but it didn't bode very well for her last time, and I just think there's others that appeal more. This isn't a bad horse, but Brad Cox has got another one in here I think is better suited for this race. Cox is 0 for 7, second off the layoff in graded stakes on the turf with 3-year-olds. Something to think about, so we're not going to use this one. Papilio ran a really nice race in the Appalachian last time, and even had a little bit of a bump in the stretch, and still was able to regroup and blow right by and win. So this one is coming into the race in good form. Third off the layoff, however, is a bad angle for Mark Casse. He's 0 for 10. Third off the layoff in turf-graded stakes with 3-year-olds. Something to think about. Still, I think this one is a logical use. Will probably is comfortable being up near the pace, which I think is a good thing in this race, so I would consider using. Flashy Gem is the one we've really got to watch out for. Coming off a career-high buyer on the synthetic in the Bourbonette, and ran behind Botanical, who will be in the Oaks. But as we noted in our Oaks analysis, the speed figure that Botanical got is a little suspect, particularly on the Thorograph end. And so maybe this isn't quite as good a race as we thought it might be. Now, this one is improving steadily, that's true, and is coming off a career-high buyer, which is also true, and was rating when this one likes to be on the front end. The fact that there isn't a lot of early speed in this race, and at 10 to 1, I think this one is a good use. And I will note this: the outside posts have not been kind to this one. You see the two efforts where she was parked on the outside did not result in wins. So if you couple that with maybe that Bourbonette wasn't quite as good as we think, then 10 to 1 is probably a fairly logical price for this one. You do get Luis Saez, which is a nice addition here, and he's killing it at Churchill to start. You got Brad Cox, so it's I think you got to use this one because of the lack of early speed, but I don't think it's quite as exciting as perhaps you might think it would be. Revelita is a good one. Her debut in North America in the Here Comes the Bride. She closed pretty well against really not much pace to run to at a mile. So the added ground here she's definitely going to like. The problem is she runs from the back, and she's going to have a lot to do late. So I kind of prefer her underneath. But as you can see in this race, it's pretty deep, and we're lucky in that some of the other races we can single, because this one's going to require a pretty decent spread. The last leg of the Oaks Pick 5 is, of course, the Kentucky Oaks. It's a grade 1. It's the 11th at Churchill. It's run on dirt at 1 1/8 for 3-year-old fillies. I'll refer you to a posting I had earlier on the elements of handicapping in the Kentucky Oaks for a more in-depth analysis, but I'll just summarize it right here. Number 1 is Mimi Kikuchi. She's just not good enough. I looked at both those UAE Oaks and the 1,000 Guineas. She stalks right off the leaders, so she'll likely be pace prominent. But she was able to get really soft fractions in both. She's not going to get that here, and I don't think she's good enough, and she's a toss. The Alleys look, that Fairgrounds Oaks, I don't know how good a race that was, really. She was a non-factor in it. She was coming off a layoff, but that was a non-factoring third. She was in the back for the whole race, and it was only a 5-horse field, and not coming into the Oaks in terribly good form. The career high she got in the Silver Bullet Day, she really didn't beat much in there if you consider Chop Chop has really fallen off form-wise. So I'm just not sure how competitive she is in this race. I don't like her at 15 to 1 either, and I would think there's other value here, so I would toss. Gambling Girl has too much to do late. It's got a big closing kick, but as the distances have progressed, she has gotten further and further back. Her early fraction is getting slower. The last race, she closed like a freight train in the Gazelle and just couldn't get by Promise Her America. I think really the issue is she's just got too much to do late. I would consider using this one under only for that reason. And if she can get a little more engaged in the race, that would definitely lend to her prospects. But I think under is probably a better bet. South Lawn did win that Fairgrounds Oaks and paired her career high buyer. Again, I don't know how good those Fairgrounds Oaks preps really were in retrospect. And usually when you pair the career high like that, certainly when it's so much greater an effort that she had run before, I think a bounce is pretty likely. So that's, I think you can still use this horse because speed-wise, she's commensurate with the other contenders in here. And I think speed is the key in this race. There seems to be a real drop-off from the top contenders to the bottom ones. So I think you can use this one underneath, but I'd be wary about putting her on top. I think a bounce is likely, so 8-1 would likely be an underlay. Wonder Wheel has just really fallen off form-wise. That Ashland was just a terrible race. Didn't factor in it whatsoever. And when she's running the 2 speed biases in a row. The Suncoast wasn't a bad effort, and it did pair her career high buyer in the Breeders' Cup. And she just couldn't get to Dreaming of Snow. And I think that was more a product of there was a big-time speed bias, and it was like a force field was around Dreaming of Snow. So I'm not going to blame her too much for that one. But the Ashland really was just such a disappointment. You can't like her going into the Oaks off of that race. I believe she can run. She's capable of running a little better than that one, but at best that would be under. And I think likely maybe a better thing to do is try to get her up near the lead and win it on the front end. But I would lean towards toss here because it just doesn't look good for her right now. Botanical, the big question is, can she run on dirt? We really don't know. She's never done it. Her synthetic form is outstanding. However, I will tell you this, that as I noted in my Elements of Handicapping, her thoroughgraph number for the Bourbonnais Oaks was a 6, which is pretty low in this field by comparison to some of the better horses. So you got to wonder about how really legitimate those numbers are. She did win on the front end on synthetic, which is not easy to do, so you have to give her credit for that. But I'm just wondering if maybe she's a little bit of a paper tiger, perhaps. We'll see on dirt. She's got the pedigree, Medaglia d'Oro and Blame underneath. I mean, dirt shouldn't be a problem for her. I'm just not so sure she's that much of a drop-dead win candidate, but I think you have to use. You can't leave her off. Wet Paint is a very logical win candidate and would be my pick in this race. Brad Cox, Flavian Pratt, Godolphin, 3 straight at Oaklawn. The only question we had is could she run on a dry track, and proved that was a resounding yes. Won pretty handily and in a pretty good field. So I think all systems are going into this one, particularly since she just ran her career high. I think there's going to be some pace in this race that should set up pretty well for her late kick, and I think that it's logical to use her. Promisor America is kind of interesting. I think her last win in the Gazelle was more a product of the speed bias than anything else. But you can see that she is steadily improving. And so another step forward, I think, is pretty likely. Now, if she runs up on the front end again, and Botanical and doesn't prove to be the monster that she's kind of looking like, which is very possible, I might add, then this one is a pretty good fit. Stamina-wise, I think she'll get the 1 1/8 without a problem. And if she runs back to that Gazelle, that makes her a contender in here. And at 30-1, it maybe is worth a shot. Front wraps are kind of an interesting thing with this horse. She's worn them twice. Once she won by 6 1/4 lengths, and the other time she was up the track. So if she's got front wraps on today, I'm not sure what that means, but it is something to watch for. And Tell Me No Lies, I've always liked this horse. She's got a lot of pluck, but the problem is she's not really progressing quick enough, really. She's had 2 career high buyers in a row. 78 won't cut it in this race. Sadly, that's the biggest problem. And she was running against Feza out west, who's undefeated and would probably be a win candidate in this race. So we can't really knock her too much for that. I just don't think she's fast enough. That's really the biggest issue. But this one is very competitive and it has a lot of grit. And that's what I've always liked about her. And I think that perhaps because of that, this one could kind of get up, maybe able to get up for third or fourth when some others are backing up. So maybe from an underneath perspective, you think about this one at 15-1. I think that price will drift up as the money gets short on wet paint and botanical. So one to think about for underneath. Flying Connection was running out west at Sunland Park. Those two efforts were pretty, not really against terribly much. You see one of them was a 5-horse field and the other is 7. Really, I mean, I think that you are seeing some improvement here, and that's a good sign. But I think this is a big class test for this one, and I'm not so sure she passes. So, given the fact that there's other early pace in here I like more, I think she's kind of up against it, and I think this one's probably going to be backing up, but I wouldn't use. But more so, her thoroughgraph numbers are pretty bad for those, even though those buyers look pretty good. I think she got a 9 for the Sunland Oaks, and that's the worst in this field. So that's a little artificial, so that's another reason not to consider. Defining purpose, the Kenny McPeaks always get a little better every time. And the Ashland, I think, was a culmination of all his efforts. And you see she ran a really big race and won at 20-1 and beat a pretty good field. So that's a really positive sign coming into this one, and given the fact that she's training very well. I always love to see when you see the 4 furlong times are getting progressively faster. And last one she ran a bullet out of 150. So she's coming to this race feeling pretty good. You got Brian Hernandez aboard, who's a really good Kentucky circuit jockey, and at 12-1, I think you absolutely have to consider this one. Only question I have is that 85 was so much better than anything else that she's run. There is the potential for a bounce, and they have to be a little bit leery about that. But I tell you, if she runs back to that Ashland Stakes, she's a contender here and even possibly a win candidate at a price. Darth Vader just doesn't like 2 turns. That's the bottom line. I think this one's an easy toss. Is just not going to get it. The Gulfstream Park Oaks was at the top of the stretch, and it looked like she was about to make a move and then just completely hit the wall. And that's just a real good indication that she just doesn't want 2 turns. And I think even with Luis Saez aboard, I just don't see the signs here, and I'm not going to use. Affirmative Lady is the big. I like this horse, and this horse has shown some steady improvement. You can see that she's just a little slow. That's really the only issue with this one. I like her. I like her running style. I like. Find it interesting that she was stakes placed before she had broken her maiden, which is kind of interesting. She's on the upswing. She is improving. Her pace numbers are improving, which is really important. And if she takes another step forward, I think the exotics are really an issue. I'm just not sure about her top end to take this one down. But I think with the short money that's going to go on the favorites here, you might get a drift up on the price. So I think that she's a use for that purpose. Pretty Mischievous to me is kind of an interesting horse, in some ways positive, some ways negative. Brendan Walsh had a great meet at Keeneland, so the barn is rolling right now, and he's got Tyler Gaffalione aboard, and they were really solid together at Keeneland. This one ran at the fairgrounds, and in retrospect, I'm just not sure how good those Oaks preps were at the fairgrounds. That Fairgrounds Oaks was kind of a lousy race, in my opinion, and South Lawn, was able to catch Pretty Mischievous when she should have basically drawn off and won that race. So that's a little troubling. Also, her bottom fraction, her last pace fraction, is not really so great. It's more like a sprinter type of fractions. And so I think when the running comes late, I think this one will make her move and get up. and try to get into contention or get up on the lead. But I don't think she's going to be there at the end because I don't think she has the bottom to finish. And that's really the issue more than anything else with this one. Speed-wise, she does match up as one of the contenders, so maybe you want to use, but I would be really reticent. I just have a feeling that this race isn't going to come up well for her. So that's what the field looks like for the Oaks. And again, if you want a more in-depth analysis, you can go to my Elements of Handicapping post, and you'll see some more in-depth study. Here's what our ticket looks like for the Oaks Pick 5. Now, you'll note there's some numbers in parentheses. Basically, what those are alternatives if you don't want a double single. But what I intend to do is in the 7th, I'm going to single the 9, Money's Gold. In the 8th, I'm going to single the 11, Caravel. And that's going to leave us some options to spread in some of the other races. In the 9th, I'm going to use 1, 4, 9, and 10. And if you want to, you can add the 7 in there as well. In the 10th, we're going to use 3, 5, 7, 9, and 10. And in the 11th, we're going to use 6, 7, 8, and 11. So that's 4 times 5 is 20 times 4 is 80. On a 50-cent basis, that's a $40 ticket. So obviously, you can add some more in. But I think you definitely have to use one single. The choice would be whether you want to use it in the 7th or the 8th, which one you feel more strongly about. But I think that gives us a good shot at what's going to be a fairly chalky ticket, I'm guessing. So maybe we don't want to spend a whole lot on the ticket, but they gives you some options nonetheless. I think we've got to go with singles early in order to get some value and be able to spread late, because I think those last couple of races in particular really are going to require some spreading. We will have more coverage for you later this week, including the Derby Day undercard. I think there's some good sequences there. Seems Churchill Downs has added a couple, so we may have some extra postings for those. I think we're going to have a session on a Derby wagering strategy, just on some ideas I have on maybe some things that you want to think about. Hope our analysis is helping you to make your selections and narrow down your options for wagering. And I think it's going to be a fun weekend of racing for sure, and I'm sure you're looking forward to it like I am. Of course, if you do like what you see here, please like and subscribe. And thank you. We thank you for coming by, and we hope to see you again. I'll be talking to you soon later this week. So until then, be well.